3D Mushu from Mulan Acrylic Nail Art Tutorial by Hotpinkzebrapolish. Hi everybody, in today's video I'm going to show you a 3D Mushu from Mulan, and this is the original Mulan. And I know it's kind of a sore spot for me and a lot of Mulan fans that Mushu's not in the new movie that is actually finally coming out with a release date. The whole thing, we're gonna actually get to see this new movie. So I decided to kind of commemorate Mushu and do a Mushu design instead of one that's more appropriate for the new movie, just because he's the best character of the movie in my opinion. So I hope you guys like this design as much as I do, and don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos as well. I'm going to begin with an overlay of a pale yellow acrylic. I wanted to keep the color scheme kind of, just the reds and yellows and blacks to keep it very powerful looking. So that nice pale yellow background really creates a lovely base for Mr. Mushu. Then encase the nail with a layer of clear acrylic over the top of the whole thing to make sure it is nice and strong. Apply that all the way down, just like so. Make sure that the whole nail gets a nice strength layer. Then file the nail into shape with your E-file. I always start out with a really coarse bit to remove any bulk. I always find that it just seems, I don't know, I get too impatient if I use a fine bit from the get-go. So after that, then I do use a finer bit just to smooth out the surface texture, and then you should be good to go. So I'm going to begin sculpting Mushu's face with red acrylic. And depending on how big your nail is, how long it is, and what have you, you can either basically choose to sculpt however much of his body as you want, and is what fits on the nail. But I would always recommend, regardless of the character, that you start with the face where you want the face to be, because the face is the most important element of any character design that you do. So if you get to do his face, but you were planning on doing his knees and his knees didn't get in it, that's, knees, who cares? But if you start out with the knees and then you work your way up and you cut off half his face, that's a little bit more devastating. So start with the most important element of the design and work your way out so that you don't have to worry about that being an issue. So sculpt his nice, open, smiling face and mouth, and his actual eye area isn't quite as big as his smile. He's got a fairly big snout that comes out. So I began there and then worked on his head, going up the rest, and then with a little bit wetter bead of red acrylic, you're going to want to add his nice curving body coming down from there. So just sculpt the start of that, and then sort of pull and push the acrylic down until it gets to the tip of the nail, just like so. Tap it in so it stays in with the shape of the nail. Add a little bit more if you need to. Working with red acrylic on top of yellow is a bit of a delicate scenario because the red acrylic will definitely stain that pale yellow if it gets in the wrong spot, and you're going to end up with a muddy orange color. So you have to be kind of cautious that you don't accidentally get it in the wrong place. Fill in his teeth with white acrylic, so that little groove that you created with the red acrylic before, basically just have to plop a bead of white in there and then spread it out. As you can see, my red acrylic bled into the white slightly, but that can always be fixed with acrylic paint later. And you're also going to want to sculpt in his eyes with just a small amount of white acrylic. You're seeing him from a 3/4 view, so you can't see both eyes the same amount equally. So the one is the full eyeball and the other one is just a little fleck of an eye. Then going back with red, I'm going to start sculpting his arms. You can't see the entire arm. Like I said, you only see part of him with the way that the design fits on the nail. So you see kind of like his arm, his elbow goes right to the end, and then his fingers kind of stick off the nail. If you didn't want anything to stick off the nail, you want to keep really smooth sides, that is where you would skip that portion of his arm. Then add his little ears and everything else. So he's got, I guess I'm not up on my dragon anatomy as much as I should be. He's got almost looks like 4 sets of ears. He's got 2 ears and then these 2 long, flowy things on the sides. So add both of those. Add his eyelids. Going to add a little bit more acrylic on that side. Then take that one little bit up, just like so. Then add little scales down the back of Mushu. Just add little tiny beads of red acrylic one at a time to sculpt those in. A little bit more on the other side like that. Just look at a picture, especially with Mushu. He has a lot of very small little details on him that he wouldn't look right without. So if you want to make sure that you get him and he looks like he should, have plenty of reference photos next to you. And there's no harm in using reference photos. I always highly recommend it. I remember I read a thread, so it was a while back, but it was somebody who was calling out an artist, not a nail artist, but she was a canvas artist, calling out saying that she shouldn't be using reference photos because that's a form of plagiarism, basically, because you're stealing somebody else's work, that the photographer, that was their artwork, and that as an artist you can't do that. If you want to use reference photos, you either have to take your own or use a live subject or all sorts of, it was a really long thing that I read. But it's very interesting to see those different perspectives. And if you're like me, I love reference photos. I use reference photos. If somebody puts something out on the internet, it's going to be used by me, probably, at some point. You never know. And I mean, depending on the scenario, I mean, you're sculpting Mushu, and you might use 5 different reference photos, and not one of them is exactly like your design, and this was anything. But I don't think there's harm in using reference photos. It's just some people kind of get their own little ideas. But I always kind of like to mention that every once in a while, that if you're curious about my personal standpoint on it, reference photos all the way. So then with yellow paint, you're going to want to add the little yellow panel down the middle of Mr. Mushu and his little whisker. And then with some a brighter shade of red paint, you're going to want to highlight him. So add little streaks of that brighter shade of red everywhere that it just kind of needs to be identified more, a little bit more brightness. Not the very end of his nose, that very sticky uppy part of his nose, just leave the darker shade, but almost everything with the rest. It adds so much depth and definition without having to do any outlines, just by doing a couple little vibrant highlights. Another shade of yellow down his belly. Wasn't quite opaque the first time, especially with yellow. It never seems to be good after the first coat. And then with black, you're going to want to add all of the skinnier little outlines and all the little finer details. With the black paint, I would recommend diluting it slightly so that it's not quite so thick, and really load your brush. So don't just dip the end of the bristles in the paint. You want almost all the way up to the handle to have paint on it. And I say almost because if it gets too far up into the handle, then it clogs your bristles and it makes your bristles spread. But if you get it close and you just load your brush up pretty good, then 1, you won't have to dip your brush as often because the paint will flow down the bristles, and 2, it makes it so that the bristles are a little bit more fluid in their movement, and it makes it so your lines just go a little bit easier. Add his little pupils and little zigzags for his teethy lines. Outline basically everything. Anytime I do a classic cartoon, I always try to look at what the original outlining style was and try to replicate it as best I can. If you look at a lot of the princesses, they don't have black outlines. They have either like a darker brown outline or something to keep them a little less extreme looking, a little less harsh looking. However, Mr. Mushu has those black outlines. He has those nice sharp lines. At least it depends on what image you look at exactly, but for the most part, he has really strong lines on him. Apply some gel sealer over that pale yellow background to make it nice and shiny. And then so Mr. Mushu really stands out, you can apply some matte top coat over him, and then you are good to go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I absolutely love this design. I am so looking forward to the movie. Maybe, I don't know. I still haven't decided if I'm going, so you guys will have to let me know. And if you do go, please just tell me what you think, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!